Nobody understood how Margaret's car ended up in this lake in the middle of the forest, but it quickly became clear that whoever dumped it here did not want it to be found again. The whole situation was shrouded in mystery right up until the trunk of the car was opened. Then it suddenly became clear to everybody what had happened here. Margaret felt like she was on shaky legs as her car was being pulled out of the lake. It looked like it had not been in here for very long, but it had been gone for at least 2 months at this point. Where the hell could it have been in the meantime? Margaret would find out the disturbing truth very soon when she started to look through the car. When the police opened up the trunk of the car and Margaret saw what was inside, she nearly collapsed onto her knees while the police all jumped back in shock. The officers could not believe what they were seeing, but suddenly everything started to make sense. Tears are starting to pour down Margaret's cheeks as all attention quickly shifts to her. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. It was a typical Monday morning when Margaret got this unexpected phone call from the police. They announced to her that they found her stolen car nearby the forest lake. The truth is that she didn't expect to see her car ever again. It was 2 whole months without any news. She felt happy and relieved because at this time she could not afford to buy a new one. The day that these people stole her car was hard for her. She was in her living room watching TV. This was actually a day that everything was going great for her until this very moment. She suddenly saw the lights of her car come on. She was not able to do anything at this time. She only screamed from the top of her lungs, but no one heard her. Before she had even made her way outside, the car had already sped off. Margaret had no idea how they opened her car, what exactly happened. Her screaming woke up her husband, who had already gone to bed and he was sleeping. They decided that the best idea for now was to call the police and report what just happened. The day after that, at the station they reported her car stolen and the police informed her that this was something that apparently happened a lot recently. Margaret hoped that this meant they would know how to help her. But this was not the actual truth, as it seemed they were not able to do much. Almost none of the cars that had been stolen in this manner had been recovered yet, so the odds to find Margaret's car were not good at all. They had no idea yet who were those people or why they stole cars all this time. It was not a simple case for the police, but they wanted to do anything to help Margaret to find her car. After many days of trying to find a clue, the police realized that none of the cars had been seen in the area, so they speculated that they would maybe transport the cars out of the state or even out of the country. Another big problem was that they had also not shown up on any cameras that were filming the road leading out of the city. They concluded that it could be very possible they chose to transport those cars in huge trucks or something like that. But the part that did not make sense to them was that the cars that were stolen were not especially valuable. So using secretive transport like this could cost much more than the car itself. The police were shocked by the case, but they promised to add Margaret's car details to the list with the other stolen cars, so they were going to keep an eye out for it. At this point, Margaret still had a bit of hope, but as the days were passing by, her hopes slowly faded. She was waiting for a call every day, but the phone didn't ring at all. Already it had been 2 months since Margaret didn't hear anything about her car. Suddenly, one morning, Margaret finally got a call about her car. She had actually forgotten about it at this point and was stunned when she picked up the phone. When she picked up the phone, she heard a really familiar voice. The person that called was an old friend of hers. She hadn't spoken to him for a couple of years now. The biggest surprise was that he called her about her missing car. She felt really relieved and happy because she believed that she would never find her car. Apparently, he had seen the post about the stolen car that Margaret posted on Facebook. The photo had stuck in his mind for months, and he thought about it quite often. One day, as he took his daily walk, he actually saw the car. He was really excited about this, so he decided to call her as soon as possible. For the first couple of minutes, she was ecstatic that her car had been found and she wanted to go and pick it up immediately. But her friend had some bad news for Margaret. The car was not as accessible as Margaret thought at first. The friend described to her where exactly he had found the missing car, and Margaret has started to lose hope again. He explained to Margaret that the car was not in a state where she could come to pick it up at all. The man encountered the car in the middle of a lake located in the local forest. At first, he couldn't recognize the car, but after a couple of minutes, he realized that the car was the same as Margaret's missing car. Both of them had so many questions about how the car ended up in the lake. This area was not even easily accessible as no roads or anything was leading there. The biggest question was why the car ended up at this spot, why these people stole the car and then abandoned it in the middle of the lake. Margaret's heart sank when she heard that her car was in the lake. She had already been compensated somewhat by the insurance company. So there was not even a good reason for her to go and get her car. After a while, she thought that this might be a useful clue for the police's investigation. Margaret knew that this case was very important for the police, and they were still working on it. She believed that this could be the lead that they needed. Plus, Margaret and now her friend were really curious about this whole ordeal. So, she made the decision to call the police station and inform them about what her friend found out. When she called the police, they told her that they're going immediately pick her up to go and find the car. The friend that had called Margaret was going to be there as well. The police officer knew that this was their only chance to detect this whole mystery of the missing cars. As they already knew, this area was not easily accessible. The police cars couldn't make it to the lake, so they had to go off-road for a large part and make it through narrow passageways between the trees. It was not that easy to reach the lake, but they had to find out what exactly happened to this car. The police were baffled as to how somebody managed to put the car in the middle of the lake, so they started to doubt if Margaret's friend said the truth about what he saw that day. Their main question was, why did they steal a car and then drive it in the middle of a lake? After a lot of thinking, the police had already a pretty good idea of why this car had ended up in the lake. The most believable conclusion was that the person that stole the car did not want them to ever find it again. The only thing that they have to do now was to make it to the lake and reach the car. After 2 whole hours of trying, they finally made it to the lake. There they met Margaret's friend and his dog. They quickly observed the car in the lake as well, so now the only thing that they had to do now was to reach the car. They were so close to solving this case and finding out what really happened that day. The friend and his dog were still waiting for Margaret and the police. A tow truck was about 15 minutes behind them, but was having even more trouble traversing the difficult terrain. Why was the car left behind in such an abandoned place? Nobody could have guessed the true reason. Even though they could only really see the roof of the car stick out above the murky water, there was no doubt in Margaret's mind that it was her car. She got more and more impatient waiting for the tow truck. She almost wanted to dive into the water to see if there was anything left of her car. One of the officers had already got himself into a diving suit. Somebody needed to get into the water to hook up the truck. But in the time they had to wait, he was already getting into the lake to get a better look at the car. The water was freezing cold. Luckily for Margaret, she didn't have to go in. He could not open anything so as not to let any more water flow into the car, but he could check out the outside and immediately noticed that it was covered in scratches. The driver had apparently not been very careful while making his way through the trees. This was strange as they had not seen any damaged trees on the way here, so they had assumed that the car had been driven here carefully. They made sure they checked the immediate surrounding area, but couldn't find any traces. The officer that was still on the shore started looking around and quickly found another path that did have some markings or scratched off black paint on the trees. But this path only led deeper into the forest. Why was the driver even there in the first place? While they were wondering about why and how the car had come from this direction, the tow truck finally arrived, and the priority became getting the car out of the water. Maybe that would give them the answers they were looking for. The true answer would shock them. The officer in the water attached the hook of the tow truck to the back of the car, and when they made sure that it was secure, the car was starting to get reeled in slowly towards the shore. It was very heavy because the car had almost been completely submerged. Margaret could feel her heart pounding. She had accepted that the car was probably beyond repair, but she was hoping that not everything inside of it was ruined. She hoped to find her own items, but they would end up finding something very different. When the car finally made its way onto land again, it was a pleasant surprise to find that it had not completely flooded with water. Sure, a bite had gotten through, but from the seats up it was all still relatively dry. Could this mean the thief is still in the area? The car could not have been in the lake for very long, so the police took this opportunity to start dusting for fingerprints, as this could very well lead to a break in the car thief case. And what a break it would turn out to be. Margaret started feeling even more nervous what was going on. While one officer was inspecting the inside of the car, the second one eventually got to trying to open up the trunk of the car. This was not easy as Margaret's key did not seem to work anymore. It was probably because the car was pretty damaged. One officer grabbed his crowbar. He ended up using a crowbar, and after a few attempts, he managed to fully pop open the trunk, realizing its very surprising contents. Margaret's was the first one to see it. Her mouth fell open and she fell on her knees. The police immediately looked at Margaret, who was on her knees crying at this point, trying to get confirmation that she was not responsible for this. When she managed to give it, the officer immediately called for backup. The officer put on gloves before he dared to touch anything in the trunk of the car, and only when he laid it all out on the ground did they get an idea of the full scale of what they found. Even the officers were very surprised with what they had found. They tried calming Margaret. In the trunk were bags full of water-damaged money and substances that would probably have been sold to make this kind of money. This could be one of the biggest local busts in recent memory. They certainly hadn't seen anything like this before. All the officers wanted to do was follow the apparent route this car had come from to find out where it had come from with all of this. But they had to wait for the backup, which arrived about 5 hours later. In the meantime, they did not touch anything. They still couldn't make sense of it. With 10 officers and 4 cars strong, they made their way through the narrow path till they eventually reached a small shed far away from civilization. And some of the cars that had recently been stolen were parked outside of it. They had probably found their thief. Who was it? When they busted in the door, it became clear that nobody was there anymore, and by the looks of this, they had made a good effort to erase all their tracks. Maybe they already feared that the police were on their trail. But as it would turn out, they missed a lot of details when making their getaway, and the police managed to collect a lot of fingerprints and even DNA samples from the shed and the cars. Now they got them, they knew they were going to find whoever was responsible. This quickly led to a few arrests and in time, also to an explanation for what had exactly been going on here. Apparently, the shed was an illegal production lab and also a base of operation for the local supplier and his crew of dealers. They stole cars that the dealer used to transport the money and product all the way through the forest. They had switch points on the outskirts of the woods where they would get in their own, undamaged cars and they would sell out of those. They figured they could just steal cars for this as nobody would ever find them in the forest. The supplier felt secure in his forest shed, but when one of his dealers got arrested recently, he got cold feet. This is why Maragerts' car got driven in the lake. He tried to destroy all the evidence, which also included dumping a car with supplies in the lake. But in his haste, he had forgotten that there was also still money in there. And the friend also got a handsome reward for their part in getting these people arrested. Margaret could buy a new car, and she honored for her part in all of this. The first arrests made in this case led to a chain reaction, at the end of which everybody involved was going to get their day in court. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.